So we are on. Good morning, David.
Hello.
Really nice to have you here. So welcome to studio. I love to be always in person. It's so much different than Zoom calls and team calls. So I really appreciate your time and the drive that you had to do today. So look, I will start probably different way. I know I said, tell me about your background, but I think I will be curious to see the journey. Like, how did you end up where you are at? how leaders on demand, how did you end up to do this work that you do right now? So if you can take us through.
Sure. One accident after another is the easiest way to describe it. So
you know that nothing is accident, right?
maybe. So I grew up in a very privileged lifestyle. So beautiful part of the United Kingdom with beaches and clean air and and an amazing education system. So I had a lucky start in life, which opened the door to university. So I went to university to become a civil engineer and studied engineering, which is not the most fun way of going to university. Quite a lot of hours of actually learning and quite difficult exams and all the rest of it. But
I can't imagine.
But my idea was to build a better world, and so I was attracted to a profession where you could basically at the end of the day see the difference that you've made. And so for undergraduate degree, learning all the theory and some of the practice of being an engineer, I was very lucky to get sponsored by a future employer. Had a fairly easy life financially going through university with a bit of money in my pocket and jobs during the summer as well. So, left university and joined the engineering firm that sponsored me through and worked on construction sites and, learned some hard lessons on how to deal with real people that work a lot harder than you do, quite dangerous situations where everyone's got to sort of have one another's backs. And I did that for a couple of years, and a lot of my university friends had sort of gone off and done management consulting and trained as lawyers and trained as accountants, and they seemed to be doing really exciting stuff. And I mentioned to my boss one day, I had sort of aspirations to take a leadership role one day in the organisation. And he said, why don't you go and train as a lawyer or as an accountant? And I was like, what? I've done an engineering degree. And he said, no, seriously, why don't you go and give yourself a competitive edge over everybody else? And so he introduced me to somebody who introduced me to what was at the time called the Big Six, so the accounting firms, and I applied to them all. One of them turned me down, 5 of them offered me a role, and I chose the one that just felt like home. So from a cultural point of view, the people that I met during the process. So I picked a firm called Touche Ross. These days it's called Deloitte. It's quite a well-known international firm. And went from an engineer working on construction sites to a guy wearing a pinstripe suit in London, performing audits on people's financial statements.
Wow.
And completely retraining. So effectively I had to do another degree while at work, which, doing an engineering degree is a good practice for that amount of content and, those style of exams where you've really got to be on top of your game. So a few years later, I was a chartered accountant, and a client offered me an opportunity to leave the firm and go and work for him. And he joined a startup business that was either going to be hugely successful or a complete disaster. He was very open about the future, the prospects.
Yeah.
And joined a startup that within a couple of years was worth more than Microsoft.
Yeah, but that was really brave step, right? When you think about that, not all the people join startup because that has to be big trust and belief.
It was, it was. I think I was reckless, in some ways, but the thing is that the mentality that you have when you work as an engineer on a construction site is that there's certain things that you do, and if you get them wrong, they're irreversible.
Yeah.
And there's certain things that you do that you get it wrong, you do it again.
Yeah.
And so you very quickly sort of learn to realize that life is made up of two types of decision. And so this just seemed like a decision that if it was the wrong decision, I could correct it. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I probably want to go back because you had such a beautiful, smooth start, of the career and school, and everything was kind of playing really well. So after that, you said that you had a lot of challenges when you started to work on site and as an engineer. And it was almost, scary, dangerous, you mentioned. So it was probably a little bit different way of going like to the workforce, I guess. Felt probably different way. So do you have any examples like or is there anything that you can share that was challenging in that time?
When you join as a graduate engineer on a construction site, you are the least experienced person on that site. You're probably not the lowest paid. So you are surrounded by people that know what they're doing, they know what the dangers are, and you're sort of finding your way. Now, the good thing is that all of the engineers that are on the site all remember that. And so everybody sort of started in the same way. So there is a pathway, and there's a very strong culture that you bring up the next intake, and so in some ways it was very similar to training as an auditor. It's this year you manage somebody that does the work that you did last year. It's an environment where you feel the weight of responsibility. When you get things wrong, the impact is somebody's Saturday afternoon has just been ruined because we need to catch up before the next week starts. The cost of the project is just blown out because you've now got cranes and machines and things being hired for an extra half a day over a weekend, and so you very quickly realise that the slightest mistake
cost of it
has consequences, and you make those mistakes and you learn very quickly from those mistakes.
So now you're kind of mistake free, right?
No, never. But this is the thing: is that you very quickly learn to, before you jump into a decision, you very quickly learn to properly define what type of decision am I taking here. And I've taken that with me for 30 years.
Yeah, that has to be a lot of resilience built up through the mistake, because when mistakes happened in your past, you had to really, you have to deal with consequences, and you had to deal with the feelings and everything what was happening, right? Because you actually impacted not only financially the company, but also people.
Mm-hmm.
So probably, how do you feel about that? Did that help you to build up, your personality and, like you said, also the decision making? So I feel like there is a resilience build up, dealing with failure or mistakes and how to take it emotionally. Plus, also building up that decision-making probably is a little bit different in your life now. I believe that you learned something, right, from that.
Totally. I mean, when you accept that you're the least experienced person in the room and there's a decision that needs to be taken now, and it's critical and its consequences, if you get it wrong, could be significant. What do you learn? You learn to ask for everyone else's perspective before you make your choices.
Yeah.
And, I'd say that in the majority of my career, at critical decision points, I am usually the person that knows the least about the organisation that is currently facing that decision.
That's great. That's great learning. I think everybody should learn that. I believe that's such a crucial maybe personality now, because it became your trait. It became your characteristic, right? You ask people for help, for advice. You brainstorm probably ideas, and you try to draw the knowledge and wisdom from other people. So I think that's really great leadership skill to have. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's leadership skills are some people call them the soft skills, right? And they're like really hard.
Learn hard.
I think one of the most important skills to protect and to nurture and to sustain is humility. And there are a lot of high intensity environments where you can have great career progression that tries to stamp that out of people. Humility is really important. It's great when you know that you're the youngest, most inexperienced person on a construction site, because there's no room for anything but humility. But it is very easy to find yourself in an environment where it's almost considered not appropriate to somebody that's going to be a leader of an organisation. And blinkers on. I
think that's wrong. Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost like we all should have reality check, right? Like all the time. Every minute of the day, we should know where is our place and where we are and what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, and what our team can do and can't do, right? So, yeah, I agree. That's another probably a day of conversation about humility and how people respond. Yeah, but I had one more question when you were going through that. Being engineer and now someone just with one question that you ask one question, okay, I want to be a leader of this organization one day, and someone just tells you that, but you need to be a lawyer or accountant, right? It's like that one conversation changed basically trajectory of your life, right? Like you moved to different, I guess, studying and becoming accountant. So how did you continue afterwards? Did you get back? I'm curious, sorry.
No, I didn't. So, and it's sort of the story of my life of somebody saying, I dare you. And, maybe that's one of my psychological flaws, is when somebody says, I dare you, it's very tempting to give something a go. So, no, never made it back. So as a chartered accountant, finding myself in industry in a high growth telco technology environment, we were a great team it was a great team that I was a part of, and we were either going to become ridiculously wealthy or deeply experienced, and we knew either way that you could you'd have something to show for a lot of hard work. So the wealth didn't happen. The deep experience did. But that was sort of another pivotal moment in my career. So we ended up basically having to restructure the business to save it. It was, pretty painful process. We went from being a stock market darling to, a business filing for Chapter 11 at a time that, companies like WorldCom and Enron were hitting the headlines. But I went to a luncheon and sat down next to this guy that asked me, who are you and what do you do? And I told him, and so he was a lot more experienced than me. And so, but, I've never been afraid to ask questions and to sort of bring curiosity. So it's like, so that's who I am. So who are you? And he said, my name's David Lovett. And I said, I've read a book written by somebody called David Lovett, all about corporate turnarounds. And he said, yep, that's me. So I ended up changing career again. And so he had just joined a new professional services firm to Europe. It had been established 20 years before in the United States. He was having a go with a bunch of other deeply experienced people on seeing if they could replicate the success in the United States in Europe. And so I asked him for a job. And he said, no, we don't know if this is going to work. I'm not going to guarantee that it doesn't work by loading up with costs by employing people that we don't know if we need them or not. Come back in a year. And so 10 months later, because I thought I'm not waiting a year, but 10 months later, I contacted him again, and he was like, well, you're pretty persistent. And so I was employee number 50 outside of the United States. And that business, by the time I left, was 1,000 people.
Oh, amazing.
Outside of the United States. So
beautiful growth.
So yeah, there's a lot of sort of moments where you just sort of see, oh, there's a new direction, and I can see how I fit. I can see how that opportunity fits with why I'm here. I wonder what would happen. Well, there's only one way to find out, so give it a go. So I worked with David Lovett for 8 years. That was before moving to Australia, but and he's and it's another sort of one of those moments. I was in the UK a few months ago, and sofa surfing like you do when you're sort of going back to the other side of the world where you come from, and his sofa was one of the places that I stayed for one of the weekends because he is a big part of the reason that I do what I do.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love great relationships that we can create, on the way. I think that's such an amazing feeling. Like, I don't know how people can leave the jobs and change the careers with anger, and frustrations and not appreciating what actually that journey brought them. That's always kind of not really. It just surprised me. Probably that's the good word. Because I'm I worked in Red Bull 25 years ago, and last few years I was always talking to my ex-boss basically, and he's in Australia now, and I was like, oh, you need to leave one day. We will work together, and he left, and we are going to work together. So it's interesting, like how like people that you have in your life for a while, they believe in you and they build up your personality, right? So you're talking to them, you're working with them, and I think we're shaping each other. So it's such a beautiful to have that, to become kind of relationship or friendship or something. So I love that. No,
absolutely. And, another thing that it's only as you sort of become more reflective with maturity that you realise, but alignment of purpose.
That's...
When you look at the people who you have built those relationships with and the people that will, be a part of your life for the rest of your life, that alignment around purpose is where it's at. And it's never always easy, right? And if you're inclined to sort of lean into challenging situations, and if finding things a bit easy, just sort of set the bar a bit higher, but that sort of alignment of purpose and then a little bit of adversity, super powerful. Yeah.
So I will only agree on purpose and purpose-driven decisions as well. We learn that on the way because it's not always the case, I guess, when we are young, or maybe even if it's case, we don't see it and we don't think about it. It's like, oh, I made this decision because this is my purpose. I think the purpose is changing over life as well with our psychological evolution, I guess, because, when we are young, we just want money and cars and just look good, and all that psychological evolution is very interesting. But I'm really curious because you mentioned something amazing in your life, and now, like, you have those 8 years, with David, was his name, yeah? And you work together, build up the company that had a lot of employees at the end, right? So that's amazing growth. And and you said that was 8 years and you moved to Australia. So I'm like, what is there? What was the decision? What was the opportunity? Or
So before I sat next to David at the lunch and asked him, so who are you? I met Kate, my Australian wife. And we met at work. So that's what happened. So she knows the story about me sitting next to David Lovett. She knows that I spent the next 10 months making sure that I'm going to get a job working with a guy that wrote the book that I found inspiring when I was doing my first turnaround. But there was a sort of an inevitability that, you marry somebody that comes from a beautiful place like Australia. The the magnetism drawing them home is just stronger and stronger and stronger. So yeah, 8 years working with Alex Partners. Always knew that ultimately we would move to Australia. I'd gone from being the youngest, least experienced associate in the firm to managing director in London, running the restructuring practice. David had retired, and the organisation wasn't really ready to move into the Australian market, and so I had to sort of turn my back on everything that I'd built and pitched myself down here. And so I sort of landed on my feet. I came to Australia and joined a professional services firm. They seemed to appreciate the skills that people could bring from overseas. Ended up living in a house that you can only dream of in Europe, and weather that you can only expect 2 weeks of the year in the UK. And it's a pretty cool place to end up.
Just by the way, I just wanted to tell to everyone, we're talking about Queensland because that's the difference, right? Being in Victoria, being in Western Australia, as like all different weather, but we are in Queensland.
We are in Queensland, and so they have a thing here that they call winter, which is like the most beautiful summer weekend that you could ever hope for in the UK, and it lasts about 120 days, so it's perfect.
It's absolutely perfect. Yeah, this is my first winter here, basically, like all the kind of year round. I'm trying to catch up, to see what is the autumn like, what is the spring like, and I would say that autumn, spring, winter is even better than summer. Like totally. It's absolutely amazing. Absolutely.
So look, it's a great place to be. I had a go at being a partner in a professional services firm. What we'd built before in Europe was professional services, but it always felt a bit different. It was always about being part of the client's team. It's always focused on outcomes. We used to congratulate ourselves when our clients would forget to thank us at the sort of celebration dinners. Right. So they'd thank the lawyers and they'd thank the investment bankers, but they'd forget Alex Partners, and we were like that. We were delighted with that because they saw our team as their team. So Leaders on Demand really was born out of that experience in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm only a third of the founders at Leaders on Demand, so there's three of us. All three of us worked for that same firm in the Northern Hemisphere. And so we found ourselves all together in a restaurant in Melbourne one evening. And we just went, let's just build something. So we're into our 7th year now at Leaders on Demand, but it's purpose-driven organisation, all about giving people that want to make a difference the opportunity to, for a period of time, be a critical part of another organisation's team. Change the outcome, and then when you're done, you're done. You just pack up your bags and move on to the next thing. So that's what we've built.
Yeah, I love the word turnaround. I know you mentioned it a few times as well, and I think it's fascinating because there is a lot of things that can be really turned around. A lot of companies, and they just don't have the right tools, they don't know the right people, they don't have the right skills probably in the team, or they're not having the strategy. So that's absolutely amazing. So I will probably try to stay here a little bit because I would like to understand, and probably it will be interesting conversation as well. First of all, from perspective of Leaders on Demand and, coming into companies and really try to turn around, whatever crisis they're going through or whatever is happening in a company. So if you can just kind of maybe put it into 3, 4, 5 points, what is usual kind of problem, or why people actually call you? What is the problem that, I just realized that I really need your help?
So the underlying issue is always the same, right? In every situation, the underlying issue is always the same, and that is the executive leadership team, and if they're lucky enough to have a board, their board are in a situation and a set of circumstances where their intentions are going to push them to the point of being overwhelmed in terms of execution. Yeah. So then how does that manifest itself? usually in four ways. The fourth way is avoidable. So the fourth way is a crisis, and a very public crisis. And so you see that sort of need for an intervention, and you then have to do an awful lot of things simultaneously, and you don't really have a lot of time to plan those things that you're going to do.
Yeah, because it's done.
So that's the worst case scenario, is that a very public, humiliating crisis has just been declared, and we see it all the time. There's at least one a month at the top end of town in Australia.
That's a lot.
Then the other three things are the three things that you need to do if you're in a crisis to begin with, and usually it's one of those three things that we're asked to help organisations with. So one is strategic direction is now clear, but how do you translate strategy into a plan that everyone in the organisation understands how they fit in? So it's operationalising plans. So that's the first area. Second area is where just execution capacity, for whatever reason, isn't sufficient. So now I'm a CFO. It's not unusual in situations that involve changes of strategy, even if you've got the entire organisation aligned with the new strategy, that needs funding. And quite often things have just changed, and so your original source of funding is not necessarily going to be your future source of funding. And so, just the expectation of boards and executive teams that the CFO will take care of that. You sort of need two CFOs for a period of time when that's on the agenda, because you still got to make sure that the control over the business is still there, that the information requirements of the stakeholders being addressed, that the detailed business planning numbers are correct. So when the burden of leadership falls on the shoulders of too few people, we're often asked to support there. And then the final area is just where there is some form of transformative outcome that the organisation is embedding into its plans, and things just get stuck. And so again, it's a very specific type of leadership constraint that we can tackle there, and that's actually taking the leadership agenda and embedding it into the heart of the organisation.
Yeah.
And actually getting the people with competence, the people with the drive, the people with the right attitude activated, and creating the permission for them to actually get the transformation that needs doing done. It's very unusual for transformation to be a top-down outcome. Top-down transformations tend to end up in frustration.
So what is the type of transformation you do? So it's within, like you started in the middle management, or?
So it usually it's led with something. I mean, transformation covers everything, but usually it's led with something. So it's either that they're going to go with technology, digital platforms, and so the leading edge is.
It's always the thing.
We are going to be technology led. Sometimes it's cultural. So if there's been a Royal Commission and somebody said that the culture's absolutely rotten inside an organisation, and you want to transform the organisation, usually the good starting point is the thing that everyone can recognise is broken.
What is problem? Yeah, exactly.
So now, that can impact who the right person is to get something activated and to create the alignment, because you sort of got that leading edge.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it is all about getting everyone on the same page and actually getting a plan pulled together. And, the most important question that you're ever asked to respond to in an organisation is, how do I fit in? And, you got a team of 20 people. That can be quite challenging, answering the question, how does somebody fit in? Unless you're prepared to create the environment for those 20 people to figure that out between them.
Yeah, and that's, again, using the skill of trying to facilitate and get the knowledge and wisdom and skills and understanding from them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, difficult with 20 people, and then try doing it in an organisation of 20,000 people.
Yeah. That's massive. That's absolutely hard. And that's why I was curious, like, how you start, because you need to kind of start to figuring out first the executive team, just align them with, the higher management team, just to really start to look at how that looks like. Because I think I was just asking because I know there are a few different techniques. When you start from bottom to top, that's usually dangerous. Like, you can't really do much there because people just can't. There's no humility. So we know that sometimes when that's missing in leadership, everything from bottom, it will be just cut off, because they feel like they are attacked, the higher management. So most of the time I see that doesn't really work, and that's why I was curious if you have any experience with that.
Look, it's so I use an analogy from my civil engineering days. So I was involved in the Jubilee Line extension in London. So basically, giant mole machine that basically chews through the London clay and spits it out the back, and then you end up with a big hole that you can put trains through. And now the strategy there was to use a tunnel boring machine, and the strategy was to get from Green Park tube station to a newly built Westminster tube station, and then into an existing Waterloo tube station. So we knew strategically what we were trying to do. We knew what operating model we were going to use, which was we're going to use a big tunnel boring machine. So all of those things are set. And then the guys are working in 3 shifts per day in the dark with jet engines blasting to make sure there's enough oxygen that people can breathe, are taking measurements and seeing that the tunnel boring machine is 15 millimetres off from where it should be.
Wow.
You don't at that point revisit the strategy. Do we think we should be using a tunnel boring machine? You don't revisit the business plan of, we're trying to get from this tube station to this tube station. So you're dealing in the tactical, and so that sort of strategic alignment down into the organisation is almost a given. If you can sort of take the analogous approach to basically building a piece of infrastructure. Business is no different.
Yeah.
So, one of the challenges is that strategic timeframes are shortening massively. It used to be 3 to 5 years. Now it's like, if you're lucky, 18 months. And then all these theories around sort of agile working practices, which, work brilliantly in software development, because there's no real consequences if a piece of code doesn't work. Just write another piece of code and see if that works. Whereas if you're operating a business that is processing transactions, and you want somebody, when they pay for something on their card, to only pay once, not twice, not picking on any particular bank in particular, but doing things in an agile way where there are consequences if it goes wrong, is a very different scenario to sort of being in a sandbox and giving something a crack and seeing if it works. So the alignment that your average board and your average executive team is responsible for achieving needs to be from that setting the strategy right the way down to every day somebody's taking a measurement and going, is this what we were intending? And if it's not, what do I need to change? And then before I hit the change button, is it okay for me to make this change? Because, could it be catastrophic outcome, or could it be something, if it doesn't work, I'll try something else? And, a lot of environments don't really have the benefit of that sort of culture, that sort of mindset. So it's pretty tricky, I think, being transformative in an organisation. My career, I took a shortcut. Most of my career, I started off with the crisis.
Yeah.
So if you start off with the crisis, transformation's easy. There's one thing everyone in the room... It's
comfortable for you now.
everyone agrees, right?
Yeah.
That shouldn't have just happened. It did happen. Yeah. We got to do something about it.
Yeah.
And so, that sort of momentum is very easy to build.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned that just now about culture. And I feel like maybe, if like when we talk about companies like constructions, or logistics, or like something that really impacts people as well, finance and everything around and environment, and you can have really, really a lot of impacts, right, and in the future as well. But if there is crisis, like you mentioned about, like being off a few millimeters, like that's not going to work. I think that's like what is major thing that is missing in these kind of companies that were operating by now. That's actually the culture piece, because when you have that little bit of agile train, doesn't need to be really agile, it can be just really teaching people the right culture, communication, openness, being okay, if something happens, I'm talking about that, I'm not keeping that for myself. And having the culture of, I guess, like failure is fine, but we need to be sure that we do everything to avoid it, and we have people around us, and we learn how to communicate. We learn how to deal with a crisis, like how to emotionally deal with a crisis, because that's the big thing for some people. They freak out and they're in stress and they don't know how to respond, and usually they make mistakes. So I feel like more and more the conversation about, I don't want to really call it well-being, but because I think people are sick of, work-life balance, well-being and all these words, but making your people stronger, maybe not in soft skills, but in emotional regulation and energy regulation and communication. I think that's the kind of, it feels like that's the major thing in a company, is to be able to go through crisis as well, or go maybe easier way through crisis. What do you think about that?
I think there's strength in numbers. So, resilience, lonely resilience is really hard, right? But you're right, there's a lot of cultures where the trick is to not make a mistake. The trick is to not do anything wrong. The trick is to be proven right. But then you have, if that's the measure of success in an organization, and then you got hundreds or thousands of people and all they measure is that personal success of never getting anything wrong.
That's crazy.
Right? You're not really going to get very far.
Yeah.
Progress. So, actually, an organization's resilience, and then a safe environment for people to work, I think comes down to the same thing, which is mistakes will be made. Yeah. And as an organization, we need to make sure that we identify when things go wrong. And as a team, we define success as how well we respond to things that inevitably go wrong. And then, that's where the organization builds resilience, but then well-being doesn't get compromised the way it can if you've got a bunch of lonely individuals just trying to demonstrate that they're not getting anything wrong. I mean, we've had changing government happening in Queensland today. It's happening right now. So I think that the Governor-General is doing whatever it is you do to a Premier to make them the boss of Queensland. And there will be a machinery of government change here in Queensland over the next couple of weeks. The first thing they'll do is terminate every contractor that's currently employed, because that's what they do. So that's the easy thing. Then some things will go wrong. So some of those contractors that have been terminated will get asked, can you come back? Because the machinery government will realise we shouldn't have got rid of that person. But that's so that they do that. That's by default. The next thing they'll do is then look for individuals that they think aren't performing and don't fit in, who aren't contractors. So, just imagine what the expectations are of an electorate that have said, we gave the last government a couple of goes, we'd like a change, see what a new government can do now. Well, a little bit hampered really, because the first thing they do is basically amplify a culture where you've just got to make sure that whatever you do, don't get your head taken off.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's sad. It's really sad, and I'm just going to sad. Yeah, it's that culture that was never really built or never really, I don't know. It should be maybe renovated. Like it should be talked about, especially because it's government, and it's such a nasty way to do that, and it always was. Like all countries, we are not different. I think that's, when you're going to Europe, it's not nice as well. And interesting, because that was actually really old school way to lead companies. When I'm going back and I'm thinking a few people that I was working with, when they joined a new company as a CEO or general manager, and they came in, and I always ask, okay, so how that goes, like when you're going in, and they were sharing the stuff, and they always said the same thing. It's like, just go, looking for workshops and just checking, all facilities, meeting people, and I fire some, because it's, it's good. And after that, just kind of get to know them. If someone doesn't agree and doesn't like me, it needs to go, because that's never going to work. And I was like, wow, that is very harsh way to approach leadership or leading the team. Like, so instead of trying to understand why that person maybe, has issue with you, or maybe what is the problem, and converse. I think that's what is missing in everywhere. In government, we can talk about that. In companies, conversation, they don't happen. I don't know why people have actually really hard time to have real conversation. And I mean real, like with all negative things, conflict maybe ahead, and everybody's trying to avoid conflict. It just drives me nuts.
Yeah, it's interesting because, management consulting used to be the counterbalance for really well-led organizations. And so you go back 30, 40 years, and there were, a bunch of multinational companies and conglomerate companies that had, almost superstar CEOs. And if you were a part of the leadership team of one of those organizations, you were in a role where you had tens of thousands of people that were inspired every day to show up and to help the organization perform. And then to counter that sort of environment where it's all about basically creating the settings so that everyone does their best, from time to time you need to bring in the experts that see the whole picture, not just inside the organization. They see the competitive landscape, they see the technological changes, they see the shift in government attitude and policy, and from time to time you need to have that sort of input to basically take a very cold-hearted transactional approach to redefining how that organization should be shaped, how it should be focusing its resources, etc., etc.
Yeah.
It feels to me, given that most of my career has been, jumping into situations where the place is falling down around your ears, it seems to me that that sort of management overlay has almost wiped out what used to be there, so the leadership that used to be there. And so, quite surprising for most people. Most people, when they know what I do for a living, in the Northern Hemisphere I was referred to as a chief restructuring officer, and I would be usually introduced to management teams and boards by banks and syndicates of banks that were sufficiently nervous that they just wanted somebody that understood where they were at and would be able to help the team come up with a plan and execute a plan that was, at least backable and defendable. And when I tell people what I do, they think that I'm the slash and burn, toe cutter, just, rip out costs. And that's not what I do for a living. The majority of my effort is figuring out how to enable the people to make the right choices so that their contribution every day gets us closer and closer and closer to the new target outcome that everyone's working to. It's leadership is usually what is lacking, not cold-hearted management.
Yeah.
I don't know what I don't know when the pendulum starts swinging back, but it is quite interesting if you look at a lot of the thought leadership coming out of the big brand strategy houses. all they write about these days is what the key ingredients are of great leadership, and it's, you're a management consulting firm. It's like, so maybe they're going, right, well, management or leadership teams are doing a great job on the management side of things, and so we're not relevant anymore. We don't have a product, so we'll shift over here and we'll start becoming experts on leadership. But both things are needed.
Yeah, and definitely. Like, you need to be commercial, same time you need to be a leader, right? So I feel like those two need to be matched instead of disconnect and say you can't be anymore, manager, or you can't be cold-hearted manager. It's more how to bring that into leadership that is actually aligned, and it's values aligned and culture aligned, and creating that culture. I think that's. I love that you said that it's mostly, and I know we are not going to be harsh here on leaders. I know there are some amazing leaders, but there is still missing that real true leadership. And it's because probably we were so long just focused on outcomes, right? When you're looking at past generations and companies that were growing up, I feel like it's just we didn't actually shift yet, like from that. Like, I'm going to factory, I need to work hard, I just need to do my hours, I need to do my profit and just done. That's done and we can go home. I feel like that kind of part of the age still there. And I think we never really shift fully, but I see a lot of, consciousness, awareness, and people try to do something more in leadership. So what do you think? I feel like I know what probably your answer will be around prevention, but I had two questions. There was, what do you think how actually companies can prevent or help themselves before they actually jump to that big crisis? Like, what do you think they can focus on? Or I'm not going to take work from you because I know that's your capacity, right? But I'm sure there are people who are listening and maybe thinking, okay, so what should I look at? How do I know maybe it's crisis ahead next year or 2 years because I'm doing this wrong? So what do you think?
The book that David Lovett wrote back in the 1990s that led to me asking, can I have a job, please? The front section of that book talks about closing the reality gap as really the essential first step when you've got a crisis situation that needs a turnaround response. And it's interesting because you can see a crisis coming from about 18 months away.
Wow.
And ordinarily when you speak with boards and when you speak with executive teams and you speak with financial stakeholders, they wouldn't correct that statement. So everyone has this intuitive anticipation of there's problem if we don't do something. So you can see it coming, and everyone, if you create the safe space for them to reflect and think, how could this play out, is very aware that it could go that way. The difficulty is it's human nature to just kick the can down the road.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, the answer to how do you avoid a crisis is to confront it.
Yeah.
And that's not instinctive for most people. You don't have to go too far into a newspaper at any particular day to see that there's, another company that's, hitting the headlines for all the wrong reasons. And the moment everyone's now aware that there's a problem, then all the data points from a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago start sort of appearing. And, just last week there was a highly publicised situation where, a director of a company expressed concerns that were ignored and said, I'm going to leave them. And 4 years later, those concerns are making front page news. And, everyone that was involved in that decision to just ignore that. It plays out slowly.
That's tough. That's very hard because in the past when I used to be in Perth, I was on board of director and we ran like one project every year. And it's interesting because it comes back to me when you talk about humility, you know, and that reality check and say like, hey, let's actually have a look where we are, and listening. I think that's another thing because I realize how hard it is. Like that was, look, I don't mind about, like, I don't want to go to gender difference and all that, but I was only one female, and after that I had one girl. She was working with me, so we were like on board of director for all years, all the time, just men, and never really. Like, we never really been accepted, even if we call up on the, like, there's a problem coming, there's a things that we need to have a look. It was never happening until someone didn't come later, and it was already late, right? So it was interesting how, I think it's humility. It's just, to me, it's coming back to that, just to really admit where we are at, and we need all people in the room. We need all different angles, you know, we need to have different thoughts, different minds. We need to brainstorm. We need to have people that know more about marketing, more about technology, more about different areas, and admit that it's not anymore like it was 40 years ago, right? Like, we didn't have internet, we didn't have, you know, things that we have now, and we really need to look at those skills and knowledge and bring all people in. It doesn't matter what age they are. It doesn't matter what, you know, race they are, what gender they are. I think that's where we kind of failed for a long time. So sometimes, you know, we ignore 20 years old as a guy, or you can't be bright. But that 20 years old can be such a great mind in, you know, technology, and they just live with that and grow up with that. And I can see it in my, like, nephew. He's 15 years old and he knows so much, you know, he knows more than I. So why we don't learn to respect everyone's opinion and really, you know, look at what we need.
Yeah, it's that sort of creating the space to understand what things look like from a different perspective is super powerful. And I think people get scared of the idea of, you know, but we'll never get anywhere. If we're going to be so consultative, then how will any decisions get made? And, you know, it's going to create inertia and all the rest of it. Now, just to share with you a really interesting observation. So in a crisis situation, we use a tool that uses the Likert scale, so you either strongly disagree or strongly agree or somewhere in the middle. And you can give a number of people 28 statements to consider, and I'm scared
to hear that.
two things will come out of that, right? There'll be areas where there's strong agreement across the people that you're engaging with, and there'll be areas where there's quite serious different perspectives on the same matter. Now, 28 statements will basically give you a whistle-step tour of any organisation in the world. Only takes 28 statements to actually fully understand the entire, how somebody feels about an organisation in its entirety. And so if you ask 4 or more people for their perspectives on 28 data points, you'll end up with areas where they agree, but it's not the answer that you'd want. So there's a conversation. You get areas that they agree and it is the answer you want, so that's good. You can deprioritize that. And then you get areas where there are very, very different points of view. So you can have a discussion. And we use this tool on every crisis situation that Leaders on Demand gets involved in. And every time the teams that we're working with are going, how did that just happen? How did we, in the space of 2 half days, completely redefine where we're starting from, what the priorities are, what the plan is? You know, it's how you stabilize a crisis situation. So people, you know, they go, this is really interesting. So then you take an organisation that's not in a crisis, share with them that there is a way of giving a team the opportunity to have these conversations and to set the agenda based on how every person in the room feels about the entire business. And in 90% of situations, a team will decide that they don't want to do that.
Wow, that's sad. That's very interesting.
It's really,
wow.
It's really quite. So the first thing you reach for in a crisis situation, because no one's going to argue with you, this is what we're going to do, because they're also looking at each other going, now what?
So people waiting for the crisis to happen, and then they actually reach out and do things. It's funny.
When they're all agreed on one thing.
Yeah.
What next?
Yeah.
Right. There's a nice void, and you can go bang. How about we give this a go?
Yeah.
And there's no harm. Right.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, we don't disagree about anything, and we already know what all the priorities are, and we've already got a plan to deal with them. Right. Chances are that's not the case in a crisis situation.
That's probably not,
if you've got an organisation that, let me give you an example of what can get in the way. Board papers are due tomorrow for the board meeting at the end of next week.
Wow, prioritisation.
So the CFO's got 2 board papers, the CEO's got 4 board papers, the head of sales is basically going to have to wing it because the general counsel didn't like the paper that they've done, and so now so they're all on edge because there's a board meeting next week. They're all focusing on the immediate deadline, which is I need the paper. If the general counsel will let me write a paper, I need the paper done by the end of today. If I'm smart, I make sure the CEO is comfortable with what I'm putting, and I've not sort of just littered a paper with bombs to take the CEO's feet off. So they're all focusing on
just short-term goals.
Just how am I going to get over that next board meeting? And then some clown from Leaders on Demand called David turns up and goes, hey, if you've got half a day, I'm pretty confident that there's a bunch of stuff that really needs prioritising and probably needs bringing to the attention of your board that the normal course is just overlooking. So it's quite threatening. It threatens to disrupt the normal cyclical nature of how businesses operate and how they're ran and how they all get into their sort of reporting cycles. And
you're fighting with so many psychological things, right? Like comfort and scared of like fear of uncertainty, like all these things. Yeah, when you can try to disrupt something.
So when I say that the average crisis, you can see it from 18 months out.
Yeah.
The crazy thing is you got 18 monthly reporting cycles in that time.
And they will be the same when you don't do anything.
And there's probably in those overwhelmingly large and long packs of reporting that nobody's actually got enough time to go from the front cover to the back cover. It's just the same as board packs. No one has actually got time to read a board pack from front to back. But the crazy thing is that problem that's sort of 18 months, 17 months, 16 months is getting closer and closer and closer. But that sort of normal way of looking at the management system and what comes out of the management system doesn't get you any closer to realizing that you need to do something about it. And yet asking people how they feel about this, about that, and highlighting that the information officer thinks something different to the finance officer, thinks something different to the head of the ARC committee. So let's have a conversation. Let's actually be human in this and forget the reporting packs and actually just go, what's my instinct telling me? What's my gut telling me? What's the receptionist telling me when I walk in?
Yeah,
and it may just be body language. It may, it could be anything.
Yeah.
But that's unfortunately. I'm afraid that the answer to how do you prevent the crisis is paradoxical, because the answer is you need to change the way that people think and behave to be more like the way that they will have to think and behave if they are in a crisis. And it's interesting because you got cyber threats and you've got business continuity concerns and all these things where it's become quite normal for organisations to go, how do we anticipate this so that we know how to behave when we do this, but no one's actually ever said, isn't it strange that if somebody attacks us and takes down our systems, that we are going to change the cadence of meetings, we're going to change the way we communicate with our people, we're going to...
You can change everything.
It's literally, as soon as this thing happens, we're going to change the way we do things. And nobody's asked the question, what if we make some of those changes anyway?
Yeah.
Doesn't that de-risk it?
It's interesting, why people don't ask, look, it's more about, guys, you need to open up your eyes and look at the things different way and try to reframe how you work, how you operate, and looking at the behaviors and processes, because processes drives behaviors. Like maybe something doesn't work the way that should. Is this going to be sustaining future? And all the different questions. I think when you're talking about that, I feel like people just don't ask questions. They don't question their behaviors. They don't question their habits. They don't question autopilot, right? So they run every day, day to day. It's the same coffee shop. I come, I drive, I bring my coffee. Now sitting in the office, I run around the team. I talk to my team. I sit again. Oh, maybe I will check emails. And I have the routine. And going out of that routine means asking questions like, is this routine actually helping? Is this working well? Is this routine works well for everyone? Why we don't have that conversation on the meeting? Why we have meetings this is like hundreds years old, right? Like we have meetings all the time about, okay, what was the sales? What is the strategy? What do you achieve? What didn't work? It's what works, what didn't work. It's all. Even that question, so many companies don't utilize, and it's the most important part, right? Like what actually didn't work this week, and people say, oh, everything is fine. That's another thing, because there is no safe environment. And, we're going to the point that people don't want to talk on the meetings. They don't want to share. They're just silly. It's like, are they silly, or is that something that was not created from leadership and culture perspective, that they just don't want to talk? They don't feel comfortable to talk. So much can be done just by, I don't know, it's training or showing people how to ask questions, how to reframe what they do every day. I love what you do, because I think it's, just showing people like there are questions. There is, 19 or 18 questions you said, or 20, 29?
28. So 28. There's 7 topics and four statements for 7 topics, 28. And yeah, if I was to share those statements with you, you would just go, how can that possibly tell you anything? Because it's not something that is sort of a measure of success.
Yeah.
And it's not a KPI. It's not a clearly defined goal or outcome.
Yeah.
That it's not in that sort of comfortable place of,
yeah, kind of that.
Can I tick that checkbox or not? Yeah,
obviously I see growth or or decrease.
It is literally, I'm going to make a statement which is it's not unreasonable to make a statement about this organisation that this organisation has this attribute.
Yeah,
and I'm going to make this statement because generally speaking they're positive things to confirm.
Yeah.
And all I want to do is just make sure that everyone's in agreement that those things that you would hope are the case continue to be the case. And, even over time, so, you've got the power of, talk to 5-6 different people and get you different perspectives. But if you do it again in 5 weeks' time, somebody's perspective may have changed.
Yeah.
So it's another very, very simple data point that's worthy of a conversation.
Yeah.
But, what do you see in a variance analysis in the CFO's report about what happened on, your gross margin last month that is actually going to drive a real conversation, the consequences of which are going to change, everyone's priorities tomorrow? You don't see the same sort of thing coming from those sort of measurables. So ambiguity is really helpful sometimes.
Yeah, but I agree. It's almost like there is they have numbers, but there is no big response to act on numbers or act on the story that numbers tells you as well. So I think that maybe it's lack of change and lack of inaction, lack of risk taking, I don't know, lack of maybe adventure. People don't have any more adventure because they are in stress mode. And I think when you look at from neuro, blah blah, I will need to cut this. When you look at the brain and body and emotions and how we work, and I think from neuroscience perspective, when you look at what happens when we are in stress mode, and we are in stress mode for a long time, that's why all these topics about burnout and stress and different techniques, how we can reduce stress. I think when you're looking at that, how people change last probably 3-4 years, I feel like they stuck. That's why it's very tough to change behaviors, because people don't have time for reflection. They're busy. And normal common word when you meet someone is, how are you? How was your week? Oh, busy. I think, we definitely, that word shouldn't be used. That's why I left. Like, I was in a networking group ages ago, and I realized that everybody's there, but everybody was answering on the way when we were walking down upstairs. Everybody was always answering every morning on Wednesday, they're busy. So why are you here then? Like, you don't have time for meetings, you don't have time to help other people. So why are you here? So I realized that it's probably the drive. That drive of stress is drive, or became drive for a lot of people, a lot of leaders, because there's a lot of pressure. And I think because we're talking about something like this as well, it's probably not easy for them to consider, and probably stressful just to hear that, because they know that needs to be something changed. But it's really hard to admit it, because they know there will be so many things now flowing in the air, and there will be moving parts, and company will change.
Yeah.
So I feel like, putting up on stress, that's why probably it's a little bit of that break. Like, no, I will just experience crisis and we will do it after, right? So it can be, I feel like that is a little bit of like an emotional, what is that? Like, avoidance.
Absolutely. And, Leaders on Demand, and if you look at the team at Leaders on Demand, right, that team is your worst ever nightmare, right? Because, how many CEOs does an organization really need? Right? We got 10, right? So we're a bunch of C-suite executives that are very strongly aligned in purpose, and we've got very aligned sets of values in terms of, so we want to make a difference. We want to basically help leadership teams be a success, and we understand the importance of humility. We understand what courage really is, and all those things. But it's quite interesting because, we're a million miles away from what a perfect organization would look like, because it's just, too many cooks, as you can imagine, right? And so sometimes it's a complicated environment inside Leaders on Demand to actually, get stuff done, and to sort of, change things that aren't working, and all the things that any organization needs to deal with. Now, what's blown me away more than anything else over the last 7 years is some of the tools that we use inside Leaders on Demand. And it's astonishing. So, for example, we've got a thing called the feelings wheel. And so sometimes the meetings just aren't going very well, and my business partner, Julia, will just go, oh, hang on a minute, I'll share my screen, and bang, she throws up the feelings wheel. And it's got all these emotions that most of us do not spend our days running around expressing to everyone. And she just goes, right, we're going to just take the next 10 minutes to just go around this meeting and just actually, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I love that.
And all of a sudden the word frustrated and the word and all these sorts of things come out. And so it's a way of basically getting everyone back aligned. This isn't working. None of us are feeling great about it. We got to basically just, crack into
so
this.
Good. Yeah, that's so good.
But what's blown me away is that it is so powerful. But we've got people who are sort of 2 decades, 3 decades into leadership roles in the C-suite, that you have to create the infrastructure to enable those conversations to happen. And so it's tough. Yeah. And then if you're in an organization where your workforce is young, this is really, really, really having an impact in some industries. The school system is teaching kids how to lead. The school system is teaching kids what emotions are and how to manage your own and how to deal with other people's emotions. So the future workforce is coming armed with a bunch of skills that haven't necessarily been polished and honed in the leadership suites of organisations, and sort of, you can almost see inevitable outcome at some point where you're going to, they used to call it mutiny in the old days when it was the British Navy sort of charging around the world, taking over people's countries. But, there is going to be a moment where for organisations with young workforces, it's going to be quite it'll be a royal commission or something that actually exposes that, 90% of the workers are basically saying that we are feeling like this. And then you're going to have this senior leadership team of the organisation going, well, no one told me.
Yeah. What should I do with that?
Yeah, it's, but it's, and, I'm a male, I'm middle-aged, I was schooled in a certain way, and at no point really did that sort of emotional sort of fluency feature that heavily.
Nope.
So you sort of just got to...
Yeah. It is, honestly, I will, when you touched on that, I'll just add something so we can kind of wrap up slowly. But I love that you mentioned that, because I see it as a, I don't want to call it really epidemic, but it's a real problem that people are not connected with their emotions and with their body. So I realized when you looking at the coaching, that's why I use a lot of like a body and breathing and different things in our body, how we can actually connect with emotions, because we have that suppressed, especially, when you look at males, definitely most suppressed emotions from the childhood, through the school, through being there for kids, trying to be always the tough one, even if the job is not there, what, I will figure it out. And I think that's really a lot of pressure, because there was always pressure on male. And I think because of that and the environment changed a little bit, they still keep that pressure on themselves, and they always think that they need to be the one that will take care of family and family of the wife and like everyone, right? Basically, they put so much pressure on their shoulders. And with that suppressed emotion already, it's just becoming a real problem. And I'm not saying everyone, but I meet so many clients. They are the most amazing, successful people, lovely people, and they're so disconnected from the body, so disconnected from their emotions. And sometimes just that little tune-in, just really, really tiny tune-in, help them to realize who they are, what they want, what is the purpose, how they can lead people, how they can communicate with people. It's almost like you don't need to go to programs and courses to learn the best communication skills, the best things, like all soft skills. You actually need to just tune in that self-awareness and emotions and understanding who you are. And I find it absolutely amazing. It's after switching that on a little bit and tuning slowly, more and up, and just really connecting on a deeper level, it changes everything. And it's so sad to see that, because I meet everyday people, and because I recognize it already, on spot, you can recognize it. It's just so sad to see, like, oh my God, like you're missing out on so much. And I think we need that education, or that maybe self-care, that was not there, especially, females were more at home, they had time to go to hairdresser, doing something for themselves, going to do sport. And when I'm looking at male kind of evolution, right? So there was like, they were working hard all the time. They were happy they came home to have food, and just go to bed, because they were destroyed, like tired. And they were slowly continuing different ways. So now I love when you see people to find the time, and understanding there is a space they need to be with themselves, do their hobbies or do something for themselves from that self-care perspective. I hope that will change, because I think they will change the leadership, I believe, a lot, because I think that is all about, understanding emotions, and our leaders are not going to be surprised when young people come and they said something and you're like, I don't know what to do with it. You are not happy. Okay, I don't know, what does that mean?
Well, you learn, most leadership skills are learned by example.
Yeah.
And so, it is interesting that the school curriculum is instilling in young people a number of leadership skills, and teachers aren't paid the sort of money that CEOs are paid. I'm hopeful that the work that those teachers are doing actually will have a profound impact on the way that people lead in organisations, because the next generation of people that are going to be joining these organisations have those skills, and so that they are naturally going to move into positions that require leadership because they're appropriately trained.
I love that.
So it's going to be very interesting. I mean, you can call out the industries that you expect to see the soonest, right? So food service industry, is pretty much staffed by
all young people.
Undergraduates are the oldest people on the payroll, and kids that are still finishing school are the majority of the payroll, and they've all got these skills. So if you're a leader in a large organisation that's running chains of restaurants and all the rest of it, you don't have to look too far to find leadership skills, because the majority of your workforce have got them. Yeah,
that's amazing. That's good news, I would say. And that's very promising. And I'm excited to hear that, because I agree. Like my teacher changed my life, basically the trajectory of my life. And I believe teachers, because they are every day with kids, right? They spend 5 days a week with kids, really long time, even more than parents sometimes. So they have massive impact on those kids. So it will be nice to see the change there as well, just to support more teachers. And I think that all kind of that industry, when you're looking at how we are running the state, how we approach people, and some of the work is not really valued. The same, in Europe you have food industry, you have usually old people working there, right? Before, when I'm looking 20, 30, maybe, 40 years almost, 35 years ago, there were people that were, running to Austria and different countries, Germany, and they tried to get wait staff jobs because they were the best paid jobs. So it's so different in every country, and it's changing so much. So let's see what the next generation will bring. And before I will let you go, because I really enjoyed this conversation. I think we can go longer, but I know you need to go, we need to run. So before that, I will probably ask the last question. What is next for you? What's next?
That's a really interesting question. I think the answer is probably taking the Leaders on Demand model and finding new markets outside of Australia, and then finding the equivalent to my co-founders in Australia, finding the right people that can sort of build the same solution in other markets. So I think that's sort of the next thing in the plan in terms of sort of where does my life take me. I think in terms of what will I be doing next week, I'm afraid the answer, unfortunately, is probably helping an organisation respond to a crisis, as opposed to 18 months before the crisis being invited in to help us avoid it. But so I think one of the nice things about my life is that I'm never far away from being grafted onto a team that have got a big agenda, and being made to feel welcome, and having a positive impact and making a difference, and so it's pretty rewarding work.
It's amazing impact.
But the next thing, flying around the world business class, sort of, with a business plan, that sounds pretty cool. So And I was thinking that you're going to say, I will maybe meet someone next week that will change the trajectory of my life. So I will leave that open. I will check on you. Look, and you never know. I'll give you a call next week if something happens. But if somebody that remembers me from the United States rings me next week and says, "Hey, where's Leaders on Demand USA?" I'll let you know. Who knows?
That's nice. Okay, so thank you very much, and please let our audience as well where they can connect with you, where they can find you, and I will share it also in the description of the podcast, so they can click the link or connect with you. So what is the best way?
So the best way is if you go onto leadersondemand.com, the website, you'll find all of us on there, actually. So that the whole team are on there, and email addresses and phone numbers and things like that. But so yeah, it's leadersondemand.com. That's where you'll find me and all of the others.
Yeah, thank you very much. A really pleasure to talk to you today. And I just realized we just got over time very easy. So thank you for your time, and I hope I will have you sometimes later here as well again, and we can talk more about what was happening in the next few months or years. So good luck with everything, and thank you.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.